This update makes grenades more reliably deal damage to players stood close to them. Since the game came out, grenades have been a little bit unreliable. An explosion right next to the player would occasionally not deal damage if there was even the tiniest bit of wall or floor in the way. This would often happen in places like Short A, where players could be shielded from a grenade's blast by the stairs or by this wall here. It's not actually an easy thing to fix. If the game sees a grenade as a point, and the player as another point, all it requires is something solid between the 2 points to make it go, yep, you're safe. Even if, actually, they shouldn't be. So maybe it should check various parts of a player's model to see if those parts are exposed, and then to weigh the damage dealt out accordingly. Rainbow Six Siege received a similar kind of update earlier this year, which might have been what inspired today's change to how the grenades work in CSGO. The grenade blast now appears to bend around walls a bit. If a grenade explodes behind this wall here, you can see I still take damage, whereas before I would not. But maybe this isn't the grenade bending around walls, but instead because it's treating me as a large blobby mass instead of a single point. I still don't know the specifics of how it's changed. There's always the worry that with something like this, it will go too far in the opposite direction and people will start taking grenade damage through walls and other things that should shield them. But from the testing I've done, it feels like today's change is a step in the right direction. The first of these tests that I did was a grenade going off when there was a wall between it and the player. When there was no wall, I'd receive approximately 75 damage both before and after this update. When the wall was this high, strangely the damage before the update already dropped off a bit. Post-update, the damage only starts to drop off when it reaches this height. At this height, pre-update, it suddenly dropped to 0. You can see from this example how silly that looks, since clearly you should have sustained damage in this situation. And then, returning to this view, post-update, damage continues to drop off smoothly as the wall gains more height. I agree with the patch notes. The damage applied has been made more reliable. I think the damage is now based on how much of the player is exposed to the blast, and not just how far from it they are and whether or not there's something in the way. I also tested standing versus crouching. I imagined that crouching, I'd take less damage since less of my body would be exposed, but I ended up taking more, I guess because my head was closer to the blast. But then, with a slightly higher wall, I took the same amount of damage regardless of whether I was stood or crouched. When I feel in this situation I should have taken less when crouched, since I'm clearly better sheltered from the blast. The other test I did was to have a tall, thin wall to see how thin it could be before the player started receiving damage. Before the update, any amount of wall would immediately drop the damage to 0. But since the update, it still deals damage if the blast can still reach the edges of the player model. Now if I changed the wall to this, you'd expect it to only deal half the amount of damage, wouldn't you? But the damage dealt remained the same as when it was like this, so the system's not perfect, but it's an improvement. In other news, hostages don't block the flash effect anymore, so players can't treat them like a pair of sunglasses. I did this extremely scientific testing and discovered that through the hostage, before this update the flashbang effect would wear off a lot faster. Although I haven't tested it, I think a hostage would block a flash in real life, so I'm not sure that this update was done for realism. And picking weapons up has been made more reliable thanks to Burke here, who posted this last week. It looks like the hitboxes of the grenades were made too large and it was interfering with other objects close to them on the floor. I tried this out before the update. It doesn't look like it, but I'm spamming the use button here, and yet the weapon only gets picked up once my crosshair's away from the Molotovs. It seems this was only discovered because of the game leak recently, which gave people access to stuff that had previously only been seen by Valve employees. And it's nice to see Burke here getting a shout out from Valve, since in another one of his comments he mentioned that he had helped them to fix other things and had never gotten thanks. Some more of the buy menu animations have been improved. If any are still dodgy looking, then let me know in the comments section. And there have been a whole load of changes to the pure servers. This is something used to prevent custom models and textures from being used by clients on those servers. Last week a lot of people were being kicked because their stuff didn't match up with the servers, so I'm hoping this update will reduce how frequently this happens, and if it still does, it might even tell you why, so you'll know how to fix it. I also hope this fixes an exploit that I've seen here and there for years. If you loaded an older version of a map and then a newer one with changed models, but the same file names, those props would go invisible. I noticed it a few times with my before and after map comparison videos. I thought it was a glaring oversight on Valve's part, but I assume it's exploits like these that the recent updates have been trying to fix. Having a taser but not a pistol no longer deletes the taser at the start of a new round. And also, rechargeable Zeuses now reload at the start of every round. What? Zeuses aren't rechargeable, I hear you thinking very loudly. It's true, in normal games you fire it and then chuck it to the floor like you don't care about plastic pollution. But a while back, in a weird game mode, we did have rechargeable tasers. And we still do in another weird game mode known as Danger Zone. It can be fired every 30 seconds. Knowing that, you now have more reason for picking that as the drop perk. Also, the drones in Danger Zone now self-destruct more reliably without getting confused by other kinds of damage. So that's it for the update. The end.